Hi there. It's part 6 of our series on mission in the Bible, and now we're skipping over to the New Testament and to Mark chapter 3, verses 13 to 19, where Jesus selects his 12 apostles. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, hearing a reading about the apostles might provoke a reaction in us that says, what's this got to do with us? We're not in the same league as the apostles. We're just a motley crew of ordinary Christians. Except we have to remember just how motley the Apostolic crew was too. How did James and John earn that nickname Sons of Thunder from Jesus? I envisage them turning up for apostolic meetings gunning the engines of their Harley Davidsons. We have the whole spectrum of the political views from that day, ranging from Matthew the tax collector, who helped fund the occupying Roman Empire, to Simon the Zealot, who wanted to send the Romans packing by the use of force. We have a range of professions, from the physical labor exercised by the fisherman to the office accountant. Who's the office accountant? Oh, that would be Judas Iscariot, by the way. The Gospels tell us that he was in charge of the finances. Maybe the 12 aren't so far removed from us after all. The quiet and the loud, the right wing and the left wing, the manual labourers and the white collar workers. That's not so very different from the diversity in many congregations, is it? Sure, we may not be called by Jesus to be apostles, and we shall not exercise our calling in exactly the same way, but there are enough similarities for us to draw on here as we live out our calling to spread the apostolic faith. And I'm taking verses 14 and 15 as the focus for our thoughts. Read them again. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. And there are three elements I'm going to pick out from these verses. Firstly, that they might be with him. In the Christian church, and especially in the Protestant traditions, we're very much into the idea that Christian life and witness involves us being highly active. We fill our churches with programs and we expect our ministers to be busy. We have a culture that faith is about doing rather than being. I believe this is one of the reasons our churches are so often tired, dry, and dying. We can no more make Christian witness an endless cycle of action than we can drive our cars without filling up their tanks or recharging their batteries these days. Our version of mission has been to run on empty. Is it any wonder it fails? Before Jesus sent the apostles out, he appointed them that they might be with him. We have nothing to share with the world if we are not in a vital relationship with Jesus Christ. How can we commend him if we spend no time with him? How can we expect people to see Jesus in us if we keep our distance from him? For sure, that involves our Sunday practices of worship and Holy Communion. But it also includes mutual sharing in small groups. It includes a personal prayer life each day. We can't just rely on Sundays. Those of you who are married, would your marriage last if you and your spouse only spoke with each other once a week? There are plenty of aids to help us in Bible reading and prayer. Traditional daily Bible reading notes still exist. You can get various ones from Scripture Union or the Upper Room or Every Day with Jesus, which has been so popular for many years in the UK, is now available as an app for your smartphone or tablet. Or the 24/7 prayer movement has produced an app called Lectio 365. It gives you 2 brief prayer exercises a day. There's a morning one with a Bible reflection that's tuned to matters of prayer and mission. And there's an evening one where we can reflect with God on how the day has gone. In the Western Church, there's really no excuse when we have so many riches to help us with our devotional lives. It doesn't reflect well on us that our brothers and sisters in far poorer parts of the world just get on with things and often have more vibrant prayer lives than us. Is that one reason why they tend to have more of an impact with their faith than we do? If we want our church to have life, we need to begin by going back to spending time with Jesus. There's really no substitute. And secondly, we read, whoops, I've just clicked the wrong thing here, that he might send them out to preach. Well, okay, here's where we might not do all things like the 12 did. Jesus doesn't call every disciple to be a preacher, but he does call every Christian to take his message into the world. We know people don't like being preached at today, but we do have good news to share. In the ancient world, a herald would come to a town or a village, much like a town crier, and there were 2 messages that he would call good news. One would be that Rome had a new emperor on the throne. The other would be that Rome's armies had won a great battle. Now, the New Testament writers took inspiration from this with their use of the phrase good news. For them, there was not a new emperor on the throne of Rome, but a new king on the throne of the universe. For Jesus had ascended to the Father's right hand. He was not a coercive king like the Roman emperor, but still one who called people to follow the ways of his kingdom. And similarly, the New Testament heralds proclaimed that Jesus too had won a great victory in battle, not by bludgeoning the enemy to death, but by going to death himself at the cross. So our message of good news is that Jesus has done all that is necessary against the powers of evil in his death on the cross, and that he now reigns in heaven, calling everyone to submit to his rule. Our message is that Jesus has overcome all those things in life that frighten us the most, even death itself, and that he now calls for our allegiance. If we live according to this message, then it will provoke questions. If we're not frightened by what life can do to us, and if we're committed to the ways of Jesus, you bet people will notice and want to know more. Well, here are the words of one such person. Quote. It's quite a long quote, but stay with me. He said this: "If you want, I'll talk to you about God and salvation. I'll turn up the volume of heartbreak to the maximum, so to speak. The fact is that I'm a Christian, which usually rather sets me up for constant ridicule in the Anti-Corruption Foundation, because mostly our people are atheists, and I was once quite a militant atheist myself. But now I'm a believer, and that helps me a lot in my activities because everything becomes much, much easier. there are fewer dilemmas in my life because there is a book in which, in general, it is more or less clearly written what action to take in every situation. It's not always easy to follow this book, of course, but I am actually trying. And so, as I said, it's easier for me, probably, than for many others to engage in politics. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. I've always thought that this particular commandment is more or less an instruction to activity. And so, while I'm certainly not really enjoying the place where I am, I have no regrets about coming back or about what I'm doing. It's fine because I did the right thing. On the contrary, I feel a real kind of satisfaction because at some difficult moment I did as required by the instructions and did not betray the commandment. I wonder if you've guessed who said those words. He's been in the news in the last week, although he said those words in 2021. He's been in the news because he was murdered in a Russian prison. Those are the words of Alexei Navalny. Look at the impact he's had living out the good news. So, there you go. Firstly, be with Jesus. Secondly, preach the good news. And thirdly and finally, to have authority to drive out demons. Ooh, well, that's a bit scary. And maybe we divide here between those who would run a mile from something like this and a few Christians, on the other hand, who would get unhealthily excited by it. We've also had this subject over the years sensationalized and distorted by Hollywood and by the media generally. Every now and again, we hear of terrible misuses of this, where some church leader believes somebody to be possessed by demons and physical force is used on the poor person, leading to serious injury or even occasionally to death. And that's why most churches restrict who can practice this. In Methodism now, you have to apply and be interviewed before you can be recognized as someone who practices in this area. You are not permitted just to go off and do exorcisms independently. And so we may not all have the particular authority to drive out demons, but all Christians have a mandate from Jesus to oppose evil. And evil is not just about what the devil does, according to the New Testament, it's also about the world and the flesh. I think it's Ephesians talks about the world, the flesh, and the devil. Now, when the Bible talks about the world in negative terms, it means the systems of this world in their opposition to God. So it's when rulers, politics, or culture line up against God's kingdom as inaugurated by Jesus. It therefore includes things like when politicians don't care about the poor. It's about when our culture raises up things as false idols. So think of the ways today that people are denigrated for not being in a sexual relationship. And you'll soon see one thing that our society treats as an idol. And these things need to be opposed. When the Bible talks about the flesh as a bad thing, it doesn't mean the human body. It means our sinful human nature. It means that natural bias we seem to have towards doing what is wrong. And this too needs to be opposed. And maybe when I've just talked about these things in that way, it might make us realize that opposing evil is not just an external thing to be opposed out there. It's also something we have to fight within ourselves. We have our idols. We have our own inner tendencies towards sin. And as I read this week Even when we take up an offering in a church act of worship, we are engaging in an idol busting exercise. For as someone said, the offering is not a time when you're trying to get money out of people's pockets. It's a time when you're trying to get the idols out of their hearts. So, in conclusion, the apostolic call to mission can be stated quite simply. It is fueled by spending time with Jesus. It is seen in living and proclaiming the good news of Jesus' reign. And it is characterized by opposing evil in all its forms, externally and internally. It's simple to state, but challenging to practice. We need to rely on the Holy Spirit to live out this call. That's it for this week. God bless you, and I hope you'll be here next week too. Bye for now.